Je vais commencer le Zoom. Alors, cher Monsieur Attali, merci d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui. C'est un véritable honneur d'accueillir un de mes mentors dans notre salle de classe virtuelle aujourd'hui. Good afternoon, Mr. Attali. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for being with us today. Mr. Attali, you are the founder of Positive Planet and several other NGOs that have for purpose the creation of positive businesses around the world, and especially in poverty-stricken areas. Now, this fits in very well with your overall objective to make the world a better place for future generation, your mission. So this is exactly what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about the future, more specifically about the future of hospitality and tourism. So the timing of this conference is not random. As you all know, the marks of the COVID pandemic is still upon us. The tourism workers and hospitality students that are here with us today are quite worried. So you have talked in some of your articles about the industries of life that include healthcare, agriculture, and others. That should be the overall direction that the world economy should be taking, ideally. And it is also at the heart of your upcoming book called L'économie de la vie, se préparer à ce qu'il vient, that is coming out very soon. Which quite literally translated means the economy of life to prepare for what is to come. Now, these industries of life, however, do not directly include tourism, but my students and I, like many others, are firm believers that all the current actors within the tourism industry have the capacity and the responsibility as well to adapt to the coming change and integrate themselves with the efforts of these industries of life, again, such as healthcare and others, and that the tourism industry will continue to somehow bring a lot of value to humanity, as it's been doing so for hundreds of years now, domestically and beyond. So therefore, I'm not asking you to tell us that everything will be fine today and that we shouldn't worry, because as we know, the challenges ahead of us as an industry are very real. With that being said, Mr. Attali, could you please give us your opinion on how this industry of hospitality and tourism will mutate in the coming years, and how the tourism industry will have to adapt itself, how this will have an impact on the overall workforce of the industry, as many of its workers are currently out of the job, because as we know, the industry represents a very substantial part of the global GDP. Mr. Attali, if you please.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you today, and my views are a view of someone trying to understand the future and the past in many different fields without being an expert in all the fields, and I'm not an expert on tourism, even if I think that it's impossible to understand the future of the world geopolitics as well as the world economy and politics without understanding what hospitality and tourism, and I'm glad that you had hospitality, which is a very important dimension of society, not only related to tourism. As you said, tourism is a very important part of the GDP of many countries, a growing part, 10% in some countries, going to 30%, 50% then in some countries. And therefore it's true that the recovery of countries will be quicker in country with no tourism, but with country where tourism is an important part of the GDP, because it's possible, but tourism doesn't recover quite easily. I say it's possible because not sure, and we may have a pink scenario where the pandemics disappear as it comes, surprisingly as it comes, in the next weeks or so, and then that tourism come back, and that after 1 month or two of reluctance and hesitations, we go back to square one, and we go back to what was tourism in the past. And therefore, many people will say, well, you forecast many things that we should change, but we don't need to change them because we are back to square one, and now we can continue our business as usual. I would like to say that I do hope that this pink scenario materializes, and I'm not sure that it will not. But even if that scenario materializes, this pandemic is ringing a bell that we should take seriously in order to understand what to change. It's a kind of warning signal, not only for tourism, but for many, many, many different fields where it was sure that we could not continue as we were going. We could not continue to go with 100 million people going to Venice every year, 200 millions, 300 millions, 1 billion people going to Venice. Of course not. We could not continue to have 1 million people in the air simultaneously in low-cost planes, and then 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, 10 million people in a plane simultaneously. Of course, it is impossible. We cannot continue to put people on the shores, on beach, with millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people packed on beaches, on the same beaches. We can have all mankind going to visit Easter Island, where I was privileged to go, but sure that the whole of mankind will not go to Easter Island, as well as many people will not go to Bhutan. And it's interesting to compare the way Bhutan has managed tourism for many years to another country which is next to Bhutan, has savaged his country, destroyed his country by mismanagement of tourism. I mean Nepal. If you compare Bhutan in tourism and Nepal in tourism, you understand the two strategies that are possible and quite challenging. Nepal has been destroyed by visitors and by the lack of respect of a Nepalese population to his own civilization, nature, cleanliness, hygiene, which is totally different from what happened in the neighbor country, Bhutan. Therefore, we were bound to change the nature of tourism, which cannot be the same when the word tourism was invented, as you said, in the middle of the 18th century for very wealthy British gentry willing to make a grand tour in French, as you know, of Europe for health reasons, which is ironic because at the beginning, tourism was a health issue for wealthy people trying to get good things for sunny places against many cold country illnesses. Therefore, this challenge is ahead of us. And there is no other solutions than to find a way to organize different kind of way to see the world, different kind of way to rest, to entertain, to have contact with nature than the existing tourism. And therefore, what is behind tourism is many things. One is escape, go outside, go elsewhere. The second is health, rest, breath, fresh air, go to nature. The third is culture, visit museums, visit city, see over civilization. The fourth is to understand what means the other way of living, the other civilizations, the other country, the other people. And all that is good, all that is excellent for the future of mankind. All that is excellent. And we need to keep that. We need to find a way for people to rest, for people to have access to culture, nature, other civilization, all that we need. And we need also to find a solution for the tourism as it is, because it's clear that the whole of the existing capacity of tourist industry is not fit to what is coming. Therefore, I would say, first, we can reiterate that the mission of tourism are still very important, very useful, and you can be proud of working in that world. If I add hospitality, hospitality is more than ever important. Hospitality means to be able to welcome the others, to be in position not to be visiting, but to be visited. And as a member of the tourism industry, you are not among the visitors, you are among the visited, wherever you are. And to be in position to be visited, to welcome the others, to be nice with people we receive is a fundamental condition for civilization. I very often quote a Japanese haiku who said, when I travel, I remember my home. When I am at home, I remember traveling, which means that we should be both. Remembering that when we travel, we should respect the people that receive us because we could be in their position. And when we are at home, we should receive the others because we could be in their position to be received. And therefore, the jobs, the skills, the technicalities of hospitality are fundamental to everything. You should have hospitality competences if you are a baker, a butcher, a shopkeeper, whatever, because you are here to be visited, to receive people. And hospitality is a key quality, and therefore there are huge amount need of these competences. The tourism industry, as it is, has to change, therefore, in all the dimensions I mentioned. First, it's clear that the way we visit iconic locations will change. I've been one of the last privileged people to visit the real Lascaux caverns sites. And I know that now it's forbidden and that we visit Lascaux 1, Lascaux 2, Lascaux 3, and I think we are maybe in Lascaux 4. We will have that. And people will have to visit copies of. That's a fact. We can complain, but that's a fact. Or we go back to a mankind of 300 million people on Earth, or if we are 9 billion, as we are, we need to have copies in order to visit. And that will be a huge potential for other dimension of tourism. Not only recreation parks, but real exact copies that could be visited. I'm sure that one day will be in 50 years or less, we'll have exact copies of Venice, exact copies of Easter Islands, exact copy of other places that could not be visited anymore. If we don't do that, we'll have tourism for very wealthy people and no tourism for the others. And it's clear that tourism was an industry which was at the beginning thought to be only for the happy few. And the most important challenge is how to change that. How to provide to not only the happy few access to the same dimension of culture, other civilization, etc. That's possible. That's possible also for the tourism industry to find other ways to behave. Tourism should be and could be a way to have access to nature, and you don't need to go 20,000 miles away to have contact with nature. Tourism should be also a way to have access to a place where you can go when you need to rest for a long period of time. For instance, I hate these houses where people, when they are old, are thrown away and forgotten by their family. And if they were to use the technicalities, the competencies of hospitalities, we can have a much better way to organize the third or fourth part of life for many people. And then there are a huge potential for tourism industry in the management of aging civilization. That's a huge potential. As well as countries, for instance, we can imagine that countries which are beginning to do that, such as countries of South, can be countries where people which are more than 60 or 70, if they want to rest, they go for 3, 4, 5 months, and the hotel industry can be not only for 2 weeks, but for 6 months, if people want to spend the time. We see that today. We have people trapped. I don't know if you now know that there are thousands of Europeans which are trapped in Morocco today because they were spending the winter in their camping car, and they cannot go back. But that only demonstrates that there are thousands of people beginning to spend half of their life elsewhere. And that's another dimension. Why camping car and not hotels, and not really excellent organization that new kind of tourism can provide. And then I see many, many dimensions. Another dimension that have been demonstrated is that we need places for families to stay when a member of a family has to go to a hospital. If someone has to be in a hospital, the family must stay elsewhere, and then we need hospitalities for family outside of the hospital. And even inside of the hospital, which whatever is the hospital, even if it's the best in the world in terms of health organization, is not always the best for food or for bedroom or whatever. And then there is a lot of connections to be established between hospitals and technicalities of the tourism industry. And more than that, I think that the tourism industry should be also part of the new way of organizing urbanism, because people are going to live in, because of distant working, which is going to take more place, part of their life in small cities, outside the main cities. And then we need to think the way people live more in a position of being a nomadic place where you live for a while and then come back to a center close to the head office. And therefore, there's a huge potential of part-time housing where there also tourism can play a role. We can imagine, for instance, that you can have your own flat in the main city and then spend half of your month elsewhere in a nice hotel in the countryside, and where as if you were at home or as if you were at the office. And if you are working, distant working, why stay at home? You can go elsewhere, except if there is a pandemic that locks you down. That's another issue. And therefore, there are many, many avenues. But the only avenue which doesn't exist is continue as it is. That will not work. And then it's a huge change. People who want to continue as it is will beg banks and governments to provide them with subsidies. That can work for a while, but not forever. What will work is to understand the new needs and to go to what I call the industry of life. Industry of life is health, education, hygiene, food, distribution, agriculture, research, digital, logistics. And if you take all these fields, you will find a lot of opportunity for hospitality and tourism to plug your competences into these fields. Therefore, I'm very optimistic for your work. Even if the pandemics last for a while, and I may say that if the pandemics disappear, and I hope it will disappear quickly, the huge risk will be to come back and hope to be going to do business as usual. And I do hope that you will be challenging enough to try something else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Attali. So with what you said, maybe we should consider changing the name from Hotel Institute Montreux to Hospitality Industry Montreux, Hospitality Institute Montreux. So we have a couple of questions as well that were inspired by the different conversations that we had with my students in hospitality sales and marketing, in human resources management as well. The first question is linked with as you mentioned, the role of governments is something we talked about quite often in human resources, for example. You have talked about the importance in some of your articles of priority loans for businesses related to the economy of life. Now that governments are creating rescue plans post-COVID-19 pandemic for tourism around the world, with, for example, in France, 1.3 billion euros last week, would it make sense to consider giving out priority loans to tourism-related businesses that are making a real effort to integrate with some of the economy of life, such as integrated healthcare, hospitality businesses, as you mentioned, for the elderly, for example, or agro-tourism related businesses as well?
I do think so, but I'm afraid it will not be done, because I think very often governments prefer to support everything and not make a choice. And I've not seen any government for the moment in the world having made the choice to say, we need to use this opportunity of this tragedy to reorient any kind of industry to the new potential needs. Although it is obvious that people don't want the same. They want something new. They want something related to the reality of their life. I do hope that there will be a selective support, but I'm afraid to say that I don't think there will be selective support. There will be a global support, and the market will be the selective organization. The market will decide who will survive beyond the government support, because the government support can only give time. It can give time to wait for coming back to square one, or can give time to adjust to the new needs. People who just use the support of governments to wait for coming back to square one will disappear. And then it will not be the government that will select, but that will be the laziness of some that will decide who will survive.
Thank you very much. Now, the pandemic has also really reignited the debate of globalization as a whole. And I know it is a topic you've talked about very often. And many people nowadays are becoming even more skeptical of globalization than before the pandemic, becoming skeptical also about having potentially a global rule of law, as they fear their loss of individual freedoms. I've noticed, however, that it's often the same skeptics that are wary of the fact that the marketplace, for example, and large corporations in general hold too much power in their eyes. But there's a contradiction in their thoughts that shows me that they don't understand really that having a global rule of law and a global tax system is pretty much the only way to create a balance of power between the marketplace on one side, that is global, as you said a couple of times, and personal freedom on the other, with obviously integrated ethics and social justice. I'm allowing myself to observe this because I used to be one of these skeptics myself. Now, with that being said, do you think that tourism will continue to create bridges between cultures in a global way, and therefore paving the way to a more unified world? Or do you think that tourism will slowly become more domestic tourism, so people traveling within their own countries, as some experts have been saying during the pandemic, and therefore potentially contributing to a more polarized world?
But it's clearly a danger. The nightmare of the future are two. One is coming back to the same world where tourism will continue to destroy the environment. And the second is the opposite, where people will close to small markets, and where tourism abroad will be, as it was in the 18th century and beginning of 19th century, only for the rich. And then tourism will be back to palaces for rich, and camping next to the main cities for middle class. That is the danger, and that we could avoid. I'm sure we can avoid it. It will be not easy to avoid, and I will raise some ideas. Of course, we'll go back to having more holidays next to our home. we can also have a way to organize the fact that going abroad is not given only to some people, but, and it's beginning to exist, even if it's happened, when I will say it, it will happen to be a scandal, but it already exists and it's not a scandal. If you want to visit some museums, you have to take a ticket and reserve on the internet or whatever. I think we will come to one day where we'll have to have a ticket to go to some cities, and you will have no opportunity to take more than one ticket during your life. And then we can maybe organize that we can have more people at a lowest cost to visit cities before we have copies, as I mentioned before. And then that needs a lot of rule of law to avoid loopholes, corruptions, privileges, which is not easy. Rule of law is, as you said, another way of managing scarcity than market. Market manage scarcity through prices. Rule of law manage scarcity through rule of law. And both have flows. Market means that it gives more scarcity to the wealthy, and rule of law give more scarcity to, if it is transparent to anybody, with uniformity which people cannot accept. That's a choice. I think that if you want to have a sustainable world, we cannot continue to have tourism led by the market. We have seen that it is destroying the environment, it is destroying the culture, and then tourism should be part of a global rule of law. It's go very deep. Tourism should be linked to urbanism, because if you look at a city like Cairo, who wants to visit the pyramids where they are lost between two skyscrapers, as they are going to be in the next decade? Then Egypt is losing its own treasure by burying the treasure with a lack of urban planning. Then, therefore, tourism should be an element of more global issues. Tourism is a treasure. It's a very important asset of some countries, of many countries. Then it has to become a way to think the global civilization. But you're right to say the choice will be between rule of law and market. And I'm afraid if we continue to have market to be the only guide of tourism, tourism will be considered as one of the scapegoats of the destruction of the environment. And it would be terrible, because if more than it is today, tourism is pointed out as the most important problem and not a solution, then it will be very bad for your industry, and you people will have a very bad image if you are not part of the solution. Therefore, ecotourism, what I call personally positive tourism. What is positive tourism? Is tourism which is dedicated to help next generations, having in mind that tourism should help next generation by preserving the environment, helping the development of local societies, helping the protection of local civilization, helping the development of local agriculture, helping the development of women, protecting the children. All the dimensions of a positive society should be embedded in behaving of tourism. And I do hope that one day you can have a kind of label of positive tourism and positive hospitality, which means tourism and hospitality taking care of the interest of next generation in terms of environment, social issues, democratic issues, and economic sustainability. 4 dimensions. That's something that should be developed. And then if you go with that criteria, then you work both for the survival of mankind and for the survival of tourism, and for a very challenging and exciting life that you can have if you do that.
Thank you so much. I tend to agree with what you said as well. You've by the way said on Radio Sud one day that you thought the Swiss system was pretty much perfect in its federal nature. Do you think it's a system that can be put to a larger scale to the world, the Swiss system?
No, what I said is that if you, the only way to have a global rule of law is either to have a dictator imposing a global rule of law, which has been done in some cases by many places in the world. There are dictators imposing global rule of law, or bottom up. People decide to gather and establish a rule of law which is more global year after year. It's exactly what the only example we have of we have two examples of a bottom up rule of law, which is Switzerland, which began in the 13th, 14th century by two villagers who decided to put their strength together against the German Empire, and then decided to put a global, a common rule of law and then a larger one. And the second example is Europe, the European Union, who decided to create a bottom-up, a nation through a common rule of law. It's very difficult. No other example of a common rule of law without a dictator of or a conqueror. Even the US, United States of America, was built like that. Then, if Switzerland succeed to do a bottom-up rule of law, that's an example that can be taken for hope for Europe, and more than that, for a bottom-up rule of law at the level of the world. But what has been difficult for Switzerland, which is very difficult for Europe, is much more difficult for the world.
True. Thank you so much. So the next question, linked to the aim of your NGOs of alleviating poverty. To what extent do you think that education, entrepreneurship, as well in the context of innovative business models within the tourism and hospitality industry that would link themselves to the economy of life, as you mentioned before, how could those help alleviate world poverty? Is there a potential?
It's obvious. Tourism is a key industry for many poor countries. And it is fundamental in many countries. If you take some countries in Europe, some of the poorest countries or the less rich countries such as Spain, Italy, or even very poor countries such as Greece, and poor, more than that, very poor countries such as Albania, they depend a lot on tourism. And tourism is a key for development, because if you have tourism, you cannot have tourism without agriculture. And you cannot have agriculture without ownership of land. And you cannot have tourism if you don't receive foreigners, even if it's tourism, foreigners from the next city. And therefore, tourism is creating a lot of jobs. And what I call positive jobs, which is the basis of our foundation, which is positive job, mean jobs which are sustainable on the 4 dimensions: economic, social, ecologic, and governance. And then tourism is a key element for the progress of a society. Look at many countries that have been out of poverty through tourism. That's the case of Spain, which began by tourism under dictatorship and then moved to agriculture and to democracy because they receive a lot of foreigners. And you can give a lot of other examples where tourism are being the screwdriver, the door opener of many very important transformation of a country. And then tourism is, and hospitality is clearly, could be a positive activity. But as I said before, tourism, if it's badly managed, is also a disaster in terms of pollution, waste management, destruction of a society. It's why I told you, just study Bhutan and Nepal. Fascinating example. Small countries, close to each other. One has destroyed its civilization and destroys tourism, and the second has protected it at a heavy price in terms of closeness cost for tourists to come, etc., etc. That's a very challenging discussion to have on comparison of these two countries.
Thank you very much. There was an additional question from a student in my colleague's class who teaches macroeconomics, Mr. Jordan, and they were asking, with all of these people being nowadays more and more out of a job, they were talking about universal basic income, and they were curious to know the pros and cons of implementing a universal basic income, and do you think it's realistic in the future?
Well, the crisis is terrible. What is not a lot of people are really realized that the lockdown, which could have been avoided, that's another issue. But this lockdown was a terrible mistake that could have been avoided if we have followed the South Korean strategy and not the Chinese one. It's what I explained in my book. This lockdown was a terrible mistake, very badly managed, not by a specific country, but all European countries. China was badly managed, US also, then that's a fact. It's behind us. Because of this huge mismanagement, we have a terrible economic crisis, and hundreds of millions of people will be unemployed for a while. We will not go back to the same level of economic GDP before 3 years minimum. Even for some countries, it will be 10. Because if you are minus 10 this year, and if next year you are plus 5, you say it's wonderful. But if you are minus 10 plus 5, that means that you are at the level of not 100, but 94. This is 5% on 90, which is 4.5. Simple arithmetics. And then in order to go back to 100, when you go down to 90, it takes years. Therefore, unemployment is there for a long period of time if we do not concentrate a huge amount of money that is available, a huge amount of money which is available, to create sustainable jobs in the economy of life sectors where there is a demand, and not to support sectors that will die because there are no clients. You should not support companies that have no clients for a long period of time. No way. That's cheating people. If there is no clients if you suspect that there is no clients for a long period of time, please change, modify, because you cannot ask governments or central banks to finance shadow companies or zombie companies for zombie economics for a long period of time. Therefore, in this context, universal income is a must. I have always been against it because I think that, strangely enough, universal income has been a request of the billionaires. That's very strange. The billionaires ask for universal income. Why? In my view, without being a paranoiac, I think the billionaires say, let's give a minimum wage to the mass of billions of people, and they will support me being billionaire because they have a minimum and they will not go to revolution. Therefore, if universal income is just a way to tame the shrewd, as Shakespeare was saying, to master the risk of a revolution, it's a cynical way of managing a society. It's why I'm in favor of universal income on the condition that the universal income is used as a way to train people. You receive a universal income, and in exchange, you accept to be trained in whatever you want. You choose. But you be trained in order to create your own activities. It's what we do with our foundation. We train people for them to find a job, or mainly to create their own companies. And our experience worldwide, even in France, is that even someone which is despaired, has been unemployed for years, can become an entrepreneur, a positive entrepreneur, if you assure him with a minimum revenue and train them and trust, giving enough trust for him to find any one of us is good for something. Any one of us is excellent for something. The only problem, the disaster of mankind, is that 99% of people living on Earth never find for what they are good. They have no opportunity to find. You may have found what you are good for. Maybe you are in this school by chance. It's not the best way for you to use your brain or your hands or your feet or whatever. But each of you and each of us, we have a field, and it's very important to look for it. And universal income is good only if it helps people to find where they are the best and become to create happiness, hospitality, wealth, economic activities for the others.
Yep.
Not if the universal income is just a way to hide laziness or tame the revolt.
Thank you. Yep. It would make sense that such a big step as universal basic income come with the conditions, and the one you're mentioning with education and people having to train themselves in order to discover what their purpose in life is. I think totally makes sense. It also reminds me of your book that I would encourage everybody to read, called Devenir Soi. I don't know if it was written in English or not, but yeah, for French-speaking people at least.
It is translated in many languages.
Beautiful, beautiful. So Devenir Soi in English as well for the audience. So there was another question from one of our students, Beatrice Cohen, that was asking, but I think you pretty much answered in your main talk at the beginning. She was asking if tourism was going into the direction of being more of an elitist activity, as it used to be, as you were saying, with the people traveling for health for reasons, for example, but mostly people that were very wealthy. So could this be the end of mass tourism in general?
This is a challenge. I hope it is not, and this is a real challenge. It can be avoided, and I give you some directions to think about it. But rationing will happen, and rationing can be good for wealthy people, or rationing can be bad for wealthy people. It's just a matter of the way it is organized. But rationing tourism is certainly a dimension of the future. Nothing to do with pandemics. Pandemics has only demonstrated, and it's already there, as we see when people have to book. When you have to book in a museum, it's already the beginning of, or an exhibition, the beginning of rationing, and then it will be more visible, and when you are going to put limitations to whoever can visit Venice or whatever other place.
Thank you.
But of course, the danger is to have it rationing by money. Bhutan has done that. To go to Bhutan costs a lot, not only because it's far, not only because the hotels are expensive, but because there is a custom duty which is high. And then it's a way to create scarcity by wealth. I'm sure we can do differently and avoid that this is only that way. But when you are 9 billion or 8 billion people on Earth, you cannot avoid rationing for tourism.
Yeah, makes sense. So thank you very much. Now, if you had to give one main advice to the future hospitality management graduates that are here with us today, and tourism entrepreneurs and workers in general, what would that advice be?
Well, if you are in your 20s or 30s, you have a lot of chance, because future can be outstanding, fascinating, wonderful. And I really envy you to be young, because I think you are going to have an amazing potential future. It's a huge challenge. Between hospitality and tourism, I would advise you to focus on hospitality, because it's a quality and competencies that can be used in any other activities, not only in tourism, but in many other activities, wherever you are, you have to have this kind of competencies, and think that whatever you will do in the future, you have mainly to think about something new. Don't do something that has been done by someone else. Don't do something that could be done by someone else. Think, I will do something that no one else but me can do. It's very ambitious, but we have to be ambitious because we only live once. And as we live only once, we have to do the best use of our life. And if you are not very ambitious, you don't do the best use of your life. That can be ambitious in terms of personal happiness or economic success or personal accomplishment, but be ambitious. Be ambitious. And to be ambitious means to be demanding, and mainly demanding to yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So that's what timing we said was 45 minutes, so we're right on time. Thank you very much, Mr. Attali, for joining us.
And if you have other questions, I will be happy to answer by mail. My email is j@attali.com, and I'm happy to answer to your questions.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Hope you have a great day. Bye.